Hi YouTube, welcome back to my channel. I thought I'd talk today a little bit about fragrances because some of you have been kind enough to say you enjoyed a couple of videos that I've done in the past where I've talked about perfume purchases and my current all-time favourite fragrance. And so I thought I'd give it another go, even though I'm not all that confident about talking about perfume. I don't feel I'm very expert or well informed at describing perfumes, but they're certainly a great love of mine. So I thought what I'd do today is slightly pretentiously call this my perfume journey. Some friends, we were talking at dinner the other night about how our tastes in perfume changed over the years and being quite nostalgic and reminiscing about fragrances we'd loved in the past, which have either been discontinued or we have to chase them on eBay to get old vintage versions, or alternatively, at the other end of the spectrum, fragrances that we loved and were mad about at one time, which we're just not that keen on now. So that sort of set me thinking about the many, many perfumes I've had in the past. Truth to say, although now I talk mostly on YouTube about makeup and to a lesser extent skincare, my love of perfume is much longer than my interest in makeup. I actually wore basically no makeup at all until I was well into my 30s, and that's been an interest that I've developed relatively late in life. Most people kind of get into it a bit when they're teenagers, whereas I've loved perfume for as long as I can remember, and I probably get that from my mum, who in times when it was much less common to be able to buy perfume or to spend your money on that, always loved French perfume. So my earliest memories are of her perfumes. I think at that stage she loved Arpège by Lanvin. And I can vividly remember that the very first grown-up perfume I got in a perfume bottle was from an auntie of mine who gave me an almost used up flask of Je Reviens by Worth, and I was probably only about 7 or 8 at the time, so it was an extremely unsuitable grown-up fragrance for a child, because any of you who remember that, I don't know if they still make it, I guess they do, but certainly back then it was a very, very heady, powdery, floral, not at all the thing that a child would wear. I say it was my first grown-up fragrance because those were the days of Avon, for those of you watching in the UK or indeed the United States, and my auntie was an Avon lady, and they did very early on specifically perfumes for children, and I certainly can remember one that I had as a child with, it was a fruity kind of cologne with a beautiful little plastic stopper that was like a peach, which I was absolutely mad about, but I think I was keener on the bottle than the fragrance, and the bottles have always been very important to me as well. The first kind of classic perfume that I got, here I reach for it, not the actual one, but I certainly had this by my early teens, was the infamous, famous Chanel number 5. I think most women who've ever had perfume or been bought perfume get a bottle of this at some stage. And in the days I got my first bottle, although of course many of the Chanels that are now in the Les Exclusives range had been historical formulations. It's Chanel number 5, I think, that has been the constant over the decades in production. This actually is a reasonably vintage flask of it. You can see a bit rusty. I got this, I don't think on eBay, I think actually on another specialist site, because I'm always on the lookout with Chanel number 5 for the older pre-19, I think it's 1987, it was drastically reformulated, and you can really smell the difference in the older ones. I actually now prefer of the new formulation Eau Première, which is much lighter. I think a really nice take on number 5. It's always a constant over the years, although I'll go for long periods not wearing number 5 at all. And if we're talking about kind of coming full circle, I'll definitely talk, if people are interested, on another occasion about my current perfume tray, which is definitely dominated by Chanel's. I have a lot of Les Exclusives. A common factor with Chanel is the aldehydes and iris, and I love both. And so Chanel has been a running refrain. I can also remember in my teenage years loving two perfumes by Cashel, both of which I think are still around. They're very reasonably priced. Année, which was incredibly popular, I think, in the 1970s. Very beautiful light floral. And Lulu, slightly less well known, quite powdery, a bit reminiscent of Guerlain fragrances. And I still like both of those. I don't have them anymore. And the other one that I loved in my 20s, which kind of boded for my future love of Tom Ford, I think, was Yves Saint Laurent's Opium, which is a very woody, spicy, oriental. I still love, again, vintage formulations of Opium. They've lightened it up and done all sorts of strange variations over the years that I'm less keen on, but if you can get hold of vintage bottles of Opium and the beautiful body cream that they do, it's a fantastic, warm, spicy, oriental, which I still love. And I think a lot of Tom Ford's kind of developed that theme, because for me, I've kind of gone off in two prongs. I like a lot of white florals, particularly with the aldehydes, and I also like quite spicy, sweet fragrances like Tom Ford's Champaca and Absolute and Black Orchid that I've talked about. Meanwhile, of course, in the 80s, we come to the power fragrances. You either love them or hate them. I hated most of them. Famous amongst them, Dior's Poison. I absolutely loathe. It almost makes me feel nauseous. And later formulation, Dune, I'm not very keen on. But I loved this one, which was very reminiscent of, certainly I had it by the mid-80s, Georgio, Beverly Hills. This one used to literally clear restaurants. And this bottle, almost full that you can see, I actually picked up in a discount store a couple of months ago when I was out somewhere in the Midlands working. And it's such a nostalgic fragrance to me. I've hardly worn it again since I've bought it. Because I think in many ways it is very dated. I was surprised to see it out again. And in some ways it smells very cheap, but in a good way. What I will say about Georgio Beverly Hills, I have never had consistently so many compliments, and usually by men, I have to say, as when I wore and wear Georgio Beverly Hills. And it's not just straight men, it's straight gay men. There's something about the male nose that loves this fragrance. Extraordinary. The other one I liked around that time and have continued to wear actually is Estee Lauder's White Linen, a very clean smelling, quite pungent white floral. Again, it's been reformulated. This is an older formulation that I managed to get my hands on earlier this spring on eBay and enjoyed wearing it again in the summer. It's a very cool, crisp floral, white floral plainly. It's probably the only Estee Lauder fragrance that I like. I think a lot of them are quite distinctive, particularly the older ones. Cinnabar, I don't know if that's still about, was not that dissimilar to Opium. Youth Dew, all the older ones. I think their kind of newer fragrances are a bit formulaic and I'm not generally a fan. Kind of around that time, the 90s, I also wore a lot of the Oceanics that were popular around that time with the kind of watery notes. Issey Miyake, I can definitely remember. There was also a Giorgio Armani fragrance. It was a kind of mixed, watery, fruity one called Joe, which I don't think they make anymore. And then I discovered, I think in the 90s, although it's been going the range since the 80s, the wonderful Annick Goutal. And at that time, it was quite hard to get these other than in France. This is Les Nuits de Hadrian, which is the only one I continue to wear. the less well known of the two Hadrian fragrances, which are unisex. It's said that Prince Charles wears the other one. I don't know if that's true. It's said that Madonna wears Passion, which is one of the range. I think they're still making. My favourite for a long time was a very heady floral again called Un Grand Amour. I just loved everything about them, the really elegant, pretty bottles. At the time when niche fragrances were less common than they are now, less widely available, it was a wonderful range created by a former ballerina who I think died in the late 90s or 2000, and now her daughter Camille, for whom one of the fragrances was named, although that's now discontinued, I believe, continued to be the nose of the company, even though it was acquired a long time ago by one of the big ranges. I can't remember which. And so I still kind of flirt with that range occasionally, although this is the only one I've got, and it's a kind of spicy fruit fragrance, actually. There's a lot of bergamot, lemon, citrus, but with very woody undertones. So it's a bit unlike most of my preferences, although again I do like the Jo Malone colognes, and a lot of those she does the fruits quite well. The famous lime, basil and mandarin I wore for a time in the noughties, and grapefruit cologne I quite like. So I go the whole gamut. I'm not one of those people who just likes a certain sort of fragrance. Although, as I say, the woody, sweet orientals on one hand, and the floral, particularly with the aldehyde, on the other, probably the dominant theme. So that kind of brings us up to the present day, which I don't have time for today, but if anyone's interested, I will show my more up-to-date perfume tray and talk about what I'm wearing going into the winter another time. In the meantime, I'd love to hear if anyone wants to put in the comments their favourites, and any that they kind of remember with nostalgia and pleasure from the past, even if they don't wear them now. I always think it's very interesting to hear about people's fragrance favourites and the kind of memories that fragrance evokes for all of us. Until next time, bye for now.